A respectable widow walks into one of the most fashionable establishments in London. Polished mirrors, perfumed air, bottles arranged on shelves like something between a chemist's and a jeweller's, each one promising, without quite saying so directly, that the woman looking at it could look considerably younger than she currently does. She believes she's buying beauty. She's about to find out she's buying something rather more elaborate than that. Her name was Mary Tucker Borradaile. By the time this story is finished with her, she'll have handed over nearly £1,400, a genuine fortune in 1868, to a woman who promised her, among other things, that a member of the House of Lords wanted to marry her. Except he did not, as far as anyone can establish, particularly know she existed. But that detail came too late, as these things generally do. Welcome back. Tonight isn't a murder. Tonight is about a woman named Madame Rachel, who built an empire out of confidence, perfume, and the oldest weakness in human nature, the desperation to stay young.
Victorian society ran on appearance in a way that's hard to overstate. For a high society woman in 1860s London, beauty wasn't vanity, it was closer to currency. It could determine the quality of marriage available to her, her standing among her circle, her entire trajectory through a world that offered women very few other levers to pull. In other words, beauty carried privileges that money alone could not always buy. Aging in that world wasn't treated as ordinary. It was treated as a quiet, private catastrophe. Newspapers were thick with advertisements promising to hold it back. Creams, tonics, lotions, all claiming some version of restored youth. Most were harmless nonsense, sold at an outrageous markup. But harmless nonsense, delivered with enough confidence, in a glamorous enough setting, to a desperate enough clientele, can become something rather less harmless. Nobody understood that better than Madame Rachel.
Before she was Madame Rachel, she was simply Sarah Rachel Russell, and history hasn't preserved much about her early life with certainty, largely because reinvention was one of her genuine talents. By the mid-19th century, she'd transformed herself into Madame Rachel, a title carrying continental sophistication and scientific authority that plain old Sarah simply didn't offer. There's no real evidence she possessed any formal training in medicine or chemistry whatsoever. It didn't matter. In Victorian Britain, appearing to possess authority often mattered rather more than actually possessing it. Madame Rachel understood this instinctively and built an entire business around it. Her establishment on New Bond Street was pure theatre. Rich fabrics, perfumed corridors, bottles with elaborate names hinting at exotic remedies and hidden scientific breakthroughs. Many, on close examination, were little more than ordinary creams dressed up with an exotic label and an eye-watering price tag. But by the time her customers worked that out, they generally already paid handsomely to find out.
Madame Rachel's real genius wasn't her products, it was her method.
A client would arrive, drawn in by an advertisement promising exclusive treatments. The first consultation would be warm, attentive. Madame Rachel had a remarkable gift for making a woman feel seen and hopeful. She'd prescribe something specific and send the client away feeling the fee was entirely reasonable. Then, at the follow-up, real progress had been made, she'd explain. But the true transformation required something more advanced, more exclusive, naturally at a higher price. Having already invested money and hope, walking away now would mean admitting the first payment had been wasted. So the client paid again, and the pattern repeated. Each visit grander than the last, the finish line always visible, always just out of reach. It's an elegant psychological trap. Madame Rachel ran hundreds of women through it for years before most of them realised what was actually happening.
Mrs. Mary Tucker Borradaile was a widow whose confidence had quietly faded. Widowhood in Victorian England could be strangely isolating. Invitations thinned, social standing shifted, and a woman who'd once moved easily through social circles could find herself, quite suddenly, on the margins of it. She wasn't hoping for smoother skin when she walked into Madame Rachel's salon. She was hoping for a second chance. Madame Rachel identified that hope almost immediately, and she offered Mrs. Borradaile something considerably more ambitious than a cream. She offered her Lord Ranelagh. Lord Ranelagh was a real aristocrat, well known in social circles. Madame Rachel, through her extensive society connections, had likely encountered him or knew of him, and she told Mrs. Borradaile, with extraordinary conviction, that Lord Ranelagh had taken a personal interest in her, that he was considering marriage. But his interest, Madame Rachel explained, required encouragement. Mrs. Borradaile needed to become more beautiful, more radiant, more worthy, in the sophistic and expensive vocabulary of the salon, of a man of his standing, which meant, naturally, further treatments. Mrs. Borradaile, wanting more than almost anything to believe her story wasn't over, believed every word. She returned again and again, each visit bringing fresh reassurance that his lordship's interest remained strong, and the transformation was almost complete. It was never going to be complete. She didn't know that, and Madame Rachel had no intention of telling her. Over the following months, the payments grew. Treatments for her skin, exclusive preparations, fees for advanced consultations meant to accelerate Lord Ranelagh's interest toward its natural conclusion. Each invoice paid, because stopping now meant confronting the possibility that everything already spent had purchased nothing at all. By the time it was finally totaled, in a courtroom rather than a private ledger, Mrs. Borradaile had handed over roughly £1,400. In 1868, that was equivalent to an ordinary household's income for years, enough to buy a substantial property outright. At the end of it, no marriage, no Lord Ranelagh, no radiant transformation, just an empty bank balance, and the slow, devastating realization that her hope had been manufactured and sold back to her at an extraordinary cost. Mrs. Borradaile was not alone, not remotely. For years, Madame Rachel operated with near total impunity, because admitting you'd been deceived meant admitting, in the brutal social calculus of Victorian respectability, that you'd been foolish enough to fall for it. So complaints stayed private, whispered between friends, never taken to the papers or the police. That silence was Madame Rachel's greatest protection. But whispers grow louder eventually. Journalists began asking questions, comparing promises against results, tracking down former clients, examining the actual ingredients behind the exotic names, and began publishing criticism instead. The woman who built an image of scientific authority now faced an audience demanding evidence. And evidence, unlike beauty, cannot be manufactured with perfume and polished glass. By 1868, the whispers became formal. Mrs. Borradaile, likely with help from a solicitor who examined her finances more sceptically than she'd managed herself, took her complaint to the authorities. Other former clients, seeing they weren't alone, began coming forward too. The charge was obtaining money by pretenses, a considerably higher bar than simply proving her creams didn't work. What made it criminal, rather than merely disappointing, was the deliberate architecture of deception. The invented romance with Lord Ranelagh was the single most damning piece of evidence, because it couldn't be waved away as ordinary marketing exaggeration. It was a lie, constructed and maintained for months, specifically to extract money from a grieving widow. The trial opened at the Old Bailey that autumn to a packed courtroom. London had thoroughly caught the scandal. A glamorous businesswoman, celebrated for years,
now facing criminal charges for exploiting the exact insecurities that had made her famous. When Mrs. Borradaile entered the witness box, the courtroom fell silent. She testified with remarkable composure, no dramatic outbursts, just a calm, methodical account. The first consultation, the warmth of Madame Rachel's manner, the gentle introduction of Lord Ranelagh's supposed interest, the repeated visits, each one promising the transformation was almost within reach. She described watching her savings disappear. £1,400, handed over in instalments, each one individually justifiable, collectively catastrophic. No outbursts, just the quiet account of a woman who had trusted completely and discovered, far too late, that her trust had been identified, cultivated, and systematically exploited. She wasn't the only witness. Other former clients came forward, each describing the same fundamental pattern with different specifics, different invented suitors, different exotic treatments, different sums extracted over different time frames. Underneath, the architecture was identical. Grand claims, exclusive remedies, carefully extended hope, never quite fulfilled. The prosecution's argument was simple. Madame Rachel hadn't merely oversold her cosmetics. She'd constructed elaborate, individually tailored fictions designed to exploit each client's specific vulnerabilities. For 4 days, the evidence piled up. The image she'd spent decades cultivating dissolved under sworn testimony and cross-examination. After 4 days, the jury withdrew. The crowded courtroom settled into uneasy silence. For years, Madame Rachel had persuaded some of the wealthiest women in Britain that she possessed secrets beyond ordinary science. Now, all of it rested on 12 ordinary citizens. The jury returned. Guilty. Obtaining money by pretenses. 5 years of penal servitude, among the harshest sentences available under Victorian law for fraud. With those words, her extraordinary career came to its end. Her salon on Bond Street never recovered. Her name, once synonymous with miraculous transformation, became synonymous with fraud. But the deeper truth the trial revealed has only become more relevant with time. Madame Rachel didn't invent humanity's desire to remain young. What she discovered, and monetised, with genuine skill for the better part of 2 decades, was how easily that universal desire could be turned into a business, given sufficient confidence and a sufficiently exclusive vocabulary. Long before modern advertising, before celebrity endorsements, before social media sold its own endless parade of impossible transformations, Madame Rachel had already found the fundamental principle. If hope can be bottled, someone will always find a way to sell it. And someone, desperate enough, will always find a way to buy it. Right, that's Madame Rachel, the woman who sold youth in a bottle and very nearly got away with it entirely. Leave a comment with which case you'd like next, and if anyone ever tells you a lord wants to marry you, provided you pay for one more treatment first, perhaps ask to meet the lord. See you next time.